Perhaps the single greatest question I get on the channel is, well, there's two. One is how to start, and the other is how to continue. I've done videos addressing both of those things, but this video is going to be a how to start video, and it's going to be a very generic how to start video. And by that, I mean we're not even going to know or discuss what specific rule set we would be using here. It's going to be in the fantasy genre because I have the most resources in that genre to get going with what I want. But it's really a blueprint for starting a solo session and meant as I don't know how many steps there are, a couple steps process to get you going, not only to get you going, but also to keep you going. And this is where the how do I start and how do I continue come into play, because if you start in a certain way, you will have a fallback and a means to continue when things falter. So for this demo, we're going to decide and say and explain why, in order to start effectively, you need a few things. You need a place, and that place has to have some kind of history. With that place, there has to be a person or persons in that place, and we'll put the person or persons in that place. And you also need at least one thing or maybe a few things in that place. With these four components, you can develop a way to start. You can develop a place to go back to when you get stuck, which will give you other places to restart and to re-go. And quickly, relatively quickly, I'm going to take you through a way of doing this. The materials that I'm going to use for the demo will be some random tables that are put together by others in game books. You'll see what the books are. You don't need to use these specific books to do this kind of thing. What I'm showing really is the general structure and scaffold that I think is the minimum that is enough to get you going and keep you going. I'm going to happen to be using some resources that I have to generate it, but there are many things that you could use both for free on the web and other products that you could buy to populate these concepts the way that would work for you. And the place that I'm going to start with is going to be a dungeon, because for the most part I've decided to use these two books, the Classic Dungeon Design Guide, you've seen this before in other videos, and the book 2 of the same by Kent David Kelly. These are widely available from the online retailer who does not need free publicity from me. Now, I will say this book offers a method for going through to create your dungeon, beginning with what the adventure scenario is. I'm not going to do that, and I recommend not doing that, because what I'm trying to do is show that whatever your story and mission or adventure or scene, whatever you're calling it, whatever that is, if it arises organically from the place, just as we arise from the places that we live, you will have a richer experience and a more integrated experience, so that if and when you falter as you go through what you're doing, you can always go back to that place and regenerate ideas. So in this case, what I'm going to do is, the first thing I'm going to do is, well, I'll start with a rumor topic. Why not? We are in places, we hear things, and we're going to roll on this table. The tables here are, I think they're mostly, in this one they're mostly D100. There's D1000 in the other volume. We got a 31. The evil overlord of the dungeon. So that's pretty generic, and we'll note that down. What we will be doing is we'll be collecting randomly generated pieces of information and then stringing them together with the narrative that we develop ourselves. Let's get a sampling from the rumor mongers here about this evil overlord of this dungeon. We got a 30. Down in the dungeon, the fearsome monster X wages war against the monster Y. If you remember or saw my Maze Rats video, there were two wizards waging war that were actually that turned into a story seed of that adventure. We're not going to concern ourselves with the weight of the dungeon or wilderness encounters. Or let's see, I do want to know who were the first builders of this dungeon, because history is important to me. History in general, when doing solo RPG work, is important because that gives you the foundation. It gives you multiple ways to go back to a situation and create a new narrative from it. If you're stuck and you have something with you that has a history, if you are interacting with a person that has a history, you can investigate that history further, dig deeper, either literally or figuratively, and come up with more narrative story. Meanwhile, for us here, we rolled a 92. The planar powers of law is what we have. And just looking at this in context here, he's got the planar powers of chaos and balance. So something to do with law. Perhaps these monsters were in conflict over the laws of the land, or how they were going to rule or create the world in which they live. Maybe they are from the same clan of monsters, maybe they're from different, we don't know. We're going to, I think, now move to the other book to get a little more sense of the actual place. Right now we really went into, well, let's see, a random dungeon theme. Let's see what we get from the theme here. Right now we went into a little bit, we went on the rumors, we really started with a bit of the history here of our dungeon, and 72 is going to take us to underwater caves. All right, 72 is taking to underwater caves. I think now we're going to go to the other book, and so we're going to roll on this cave or cavern with special features. We haven't really developed the cave or cavern at all yet, beyond knowing that it's an underwater one, but we're going to do that. These are D1000 rolls, and as my usual, I will be rolling in alphabetical order of color, or reading in alphabetical order of color, so blue, green, yellow, and hopefully I will not forget that along the way, as sometimes happens. So I rolled, in this case, a 680, and that brings us to pot shards or broken relics. I can't see that. I think that's probably pot shards, but I don't know what a pot shard is. Pot shards and broken relics. Well, if there were some monsters fighting, I would imagine that they would have some broken things. But the idea of a broken relic or a broken pot shard is telling me that perhaps there, in this dungeon, in this underwater cave, was something that was maybe a shrine, or what else could it be? It could have been a museum. Why would we have pot shards and or relics? So let's go to the shrine. Maybe they went into the shrine to talk to their deity and see which one of them had the right approach to whatever the problem is, and then a fight broke out. We don't even know who they are. We don't know what the deity is, but that makes sense to me. That fight broke out there, and that's why we ended up with these broken pot shards and relics. And of course, perhaps I'm saying now, when I put somebody here, or when I put somebody outside of it, maybe they have a piece of a relic that they're trying to return to this place for some reason. I don't know. All right, well, let's go and see. Let's see what the deity's domain is. Let's see. I don't know. That's going to give us some direction on what they were fighting about. We can do that. So we've got a 398 on that. Fury or wrath. So the deity's domain itself is one of anger. You could take this in the direction of suggesting what type of monsters these are, angry ones. Well, they're monsters, so that doesn't really give us too much, but it's confirming, there's a deity of anger and there's fighting going on in front of him about something, and things got broken. That's what we got. And they're fighting, let's say they're fighting in a room, in an altar room, and we will see, let's find a little bit more about the altar itself, or the purpose, or the type of worship that went on there. And we rolled a 486 on that. Minion visitation. Well, indeed. So, indeed, these are two minions that were perhaps called by the god to be sent out to do something, as minions are, and they disagreed about it. And maybe what they were sent out to do had to do with the rule of law and how things were being obeyed or not. They disagreed over it. A fight broke out. There were things broken, and that is already a part of a story right here, which I think I'm going to perhaps move on from at the moment to get to something else. But this is demonstrating, and this is all happening at an underwater cave. We already have a little story here, a place to go. If you started out with a character, we don't even have a character, we don't even have a rule set, but we have a goal. We want to know what happens next. And ultimately, at the heart of any successful solo RPG experience is wanting to know what happens next. If you don't want to know what happens next, you're just rolling on tables, you're just rolling dice. So we've created a situation with these few random rolls, and what I interpreted from them, that we have even one whole little mission that could be simply going into this cave, finding this altar where this is taking place, perhaps interceding, perhaps not, perhaps talking. Maybe we're in alignment with the god. Maybe we are trying to help the god and straighten out his problem with his minions. That's one possibility. Maybe we have a character. I often suggest giving a character a trinket. I often do a random roll for the trinket, but perhaps the trinket is some kind of relic that is attached to this place. If it is a relic that's attached to this place, you could roll it up with its own history. And maybe I'll talk about how to do that in a minute. So you can see, just from focusing on the place with a little history, one whole way to start out an adventure. Where I was going to go is to the person, but instead I'm going to go to the thing, because based on what we've already created here, I know that my character or my party is going to be carrying a relic, and this relic is somehow going to be related to what is already going on in the dungeon. And so I'm going to go to this section on containers, because my relic will be in a container, on container material or craftsmanship. And again, I just sort of pre-decided what I was going to use here, but there are certainly many, many resources, online resources, as well as those you could purchase in physical copies that will show you lists of tables that have all sorts of things in it. But right now I'm sticking here, and I rolled a 686, and so my relic is in a container made of stone. Well, neophyte stone. That's just telling me not a whole lot, but actually, what it is telling me is that this relic came from this cave system, because we already know we're in an underwater cave system, but that's going to have some stones. So the relic is local to the cave system. And so what that would really do is give me the sense of starting out within the caves, that the story that I am doing, that I would be doing, is really within this cave system. And so however I situate my party is going to be within the caves, and initially perhaps they are going to, I don't know what that is, but perhaps they are going to be traveling toward the the place of the monsters fighting. And that would be, if this was, obviously this is kind of a dungeon crawl scenario, that is where they would be. Given that they have some kind of a stone relic that came from within the caves, perhaps what I would do was situate them more specifically when I started rolling the place here. Now on a piece of paper that's fairly illegible. When I started rolling this place here, I was initially thinking perhaps it would be where they started, but in fact it is where they are going to. I could go back and re-roll on the caves and get some more sense of where they are, specifically where they are starting out. But instead, what I want to do is ask, well, who are they, or who is this person? Now, the decision about whether you're going to start out with one person, two, three people, there's no formula for that. I myself generally just have a feel or a sense of what I want to do. How much do I want to manage? How detailed in character creation am I going to get? And this is where you might start to think about the rule set that you're using. How detailed is it? How much do you want to invest in character creation? And that's the topic of a different video. But I have said across the channel, and I would remind everyone and say that again here, starting out a character with an item, with a trinket, with something that has a history, a feeling, an emotion. That is what I do, because it gives you a trajectory right away. Here, I know I have at least one character or a party or two characters, whatever they are. They are carrying some type of sacred relic. It is a piece of something that is in an altar room, perhaps with a deity, where some monsters are fighting about how the law of the land is going to be enforced, executed, and I have to figure out when I roll this character up what the character's relationship to that situation is. I could roll on a random table and decide, I could roll on a stock table of characters, fantasy characters, and see what I came up with. If I came up with perhaps a warrior or a barbarian, it would lead the story in a different direction than if I came up with something like a cleric. That's pretty obvious. But why is that obvious? Well, it's obvious because we already have a little narrative, a little story, and we are already placing our character into that. This is a way of avoiding starting with character creation, which is very often one of the first things you would see in a book that you are using, and get a character and then basically just have a bunch of stats and not really know what to do with it. You have a character within a rule set, but you don't know what to do with it. And again, maybe it slipped your mind, but I don't even have a rule set. I don't even know what the mechanics are for any of this. I'm just simply creating a story. It's a story that feel free to use and develop on your own. I would love to hear about people using this story and how they populated it and what the difference made with the character that they used and the rules that they used, and this basic narrative arc that is a suggestion of a story for you. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that when you start this way, it also gives you something to come back to. So now we have this concept that the relic was found in the underwater cavern system that the monsters are fighting in, that the altar is in. You could come back to the starting point. If I were doing this, continuing on, if I were doing this, what I would do next is roll up a little bit more about a locale within the caverns to see if that suggested to me what type of character I was playing with, or characters. Or I would simply go to or create a list of random fantasy tropes of classes or races of characters, roll on that, and then based on what I got, try to tie together the reason behind that person being there and the reason behind their mission. Once I had that, then I would sort of figure out what kind of rules I was using and start to make some mechanical rules for the character, and by that I mean the stats. so that I created the character along the character creation lines. But already the character would have something to do. The character could come back to the original room. The character could search for remaining pieces of the relic. The character could encounter people from whom he obtained the relic, perhaps. The character could obviously continue with the main idea that we're suggesting here, which is find this altar room, try to intercede or see how the monsters were fighting with each other, interact with the deity. If there is a deity, who is the deity? Roll up something of that nature. How would the deity be impacting all of this world, and what is the relationship of the deity to the other NPCs in the world, if there are any, etc. So I hope you've enjoyed this little story seed that I've put out there, and a method for starting out sessions that involves not a rule set and not stats, but rather creating a place with a history and some people and some things to put in it.